Hi friends, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how to get data from IMDb and then in R create a graph just like this one. This graph is showing the IMDb ratings for Stranger Things. It's got little points representing the rating for each episode and then the red bars representing the average of those for the whole season. We can see a few interesting patterns where in some seasons the episodes flick above and below the average more than others. Season 2 seems to be the most consistent, other than that really interesting outlier of episode 7 from season 2. It's been quite a long time since I watched Stranger Things. I feel like I actually want to go back and rewatch and see quite what was going on in that episode and why people rated it so low. A lot of the credit for this graph needs to go to Ansgar Walsing. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. So Ansgar has this GitHub page by data, and a couple of years ago originally posted the code to make a graph that looks very similar to what I've shared. I've made a few little visual adjustments, nothing too major, but I have also made a big simplification to how the data is put into R. So you can go to GitHub. I would definitely recommend giving Ansgar a follow. Also a really good person to follow on LinkedIn to learn more about R and data science and things like that. So for us to produce this graph, first step is going to be to get the IMDb data. So IMDb is actually really nice with this. They have non-commercial data sets, and so we can see here the IMDb developer page, and they've got descriptions of a number of different data sets that they share. And for each one there is different information contained within it. The way that they distribute it is a TSV or tab separated value file, and then they compress it with gzip to make it smaller. They put all of these on this page here. I will link this up. And so the ones that we want are the title basics, title episode, and title ratings. So if you download each of those, and then you should just be able to unzip those, so we just have the TSV file sitting there for each. Generally I would put these in the same folder as my .r file for convenience, and then we can now get these loaded up into R. So kicking off in R, we want to load a few packages, Tidyverse because we're going to be using ggplot and a few other bits and pieces, and then 3 that you may not have used before, so Shadow Text, ggfx and ggtext, and they are just going to do some of the effects, so the shadows and the glowing points and things like that. So those 3 just help us to adjust the visuals and make them more on that Stranger Things theme. The way that we can get our IMDb data is just using read_tsv. Do that 3 times for our 3 different files. And this is a really nice, convenient way to get the data into R. I've seen people using all sorts of fancy SQL and stuff like that, but in fact these are just tab separated. They will go in. The basics and the episode do take a little bit of time. I mean, we're talking seconds rather than minutes on most machines, but when you enter that you will have to wait just a few seconds for it to load up. Once we've done that, then we want to filter down to just Stranger Things, and then we want to start merging the ratings. So there's a little bit of merging that goes on because the naming of the movies and TV shows and episodes are separated. The ratings, they are just identified by little code numbers. So we need to do a little bit of merging here just to be able to link everything up together. So you'll see there that we've just used a little bit of piping. We've used a filter, so we're filtering by our title, which is just the code for Stranger Things, so that ID, and then we are doing an inner join, linking up our ratings and then sorting them by season number and then episode number. So that's all we need to do to get most of our data. Just scrolling down, because we're not just plotting ratings, we're also plotting the averages for the seasons with those horizontal bars. We need to find the season ratings, and then after that we make a couple of vectors that just have our episode ratings, and then just for convenience, because we're going to be plotting onto an XY plot, it can be handy to just have some of the coordinates that we're going to be using. So this this next bit where we're grabbing the minimum and the median, that's just actually going to help us with the locations where we want to be able to add some lines and some headings. So if you do go and look at Ansgar's version of this code, the bit where we're getting the data I've made a little bit simpler. The remainder of this is very much theirs. I've made a few little visual edits, and you'll notice when you put the two graphs together there's a few little changes that I've made. I've made the subtitle shorter, and I've also added some little highlights on the title, just trying to make it look more like the Stranger Things actual logo with the line above, and then this one next to things as well. Made the bars a little bit skinnier, just some very subtle little bits and pieces, took the caption away, made this shorter. But this is very much someone else's work. I want to ensure that I am highlighting that, and the purpose of this video is very much to talk through and explain the code. So then we get into the graphing. There's a couple of little bits of setup. So one is this bit here where we've got a function, and what this function does is it lets us annotate onto a graph. So annotate is a function that lets us add something to a ggplot, and rather than adding it from the data set that we've supplied in AES, we can just add something else instead. And so this is a nice way for us to be able to add little labels and things like that. The reason for doing this as a function is to be able to just get all of the formatting information here in R once. So getting the font and the size and the color, rather than having to specify all of this every time we want to add some bits of text and labels onto our graph. It's all just there. Similarly, we've got the main color, background color. Technically we don't need these. We could put these just each time. Just convenient for making little adjustments and not having to repeat yourself over and over. So rather than having to go through, if we wanted to make a subtle change to which red we were using, we do it once here, and then every time where we say main color, we've already got that adjustment. We've got our text for our titles and subtitles. To get the lines, I used an underscore that goes above stranger. The /n just represents a new line, and then I used an ASCII character, which is a line just running above the characters there to get those lines next to things. I removed the caption and I shortened the subtitle just to reduce the amount of text that's on the graph without really taking away too much of the explanation. As we come down, our next thing here, it's kind of an interesting way of doing it. And so when we look at our graph, we need to remember that really it is just an XY axis. So on this graph, we've got scatter plot points, we've got these horizontal lines, we've got these curves. They're all sitting on an XY axis. We don't have the X-axis labeled as such, but effectively what we have and what we've done is we've just counted through the episodes. So this is just 1, 2, 3, 4, and then when we get to 8, this is actually 9, 10, 11. It just keeps counting through. The code that we were just looking at, it's actually kind of clever, just does something very subtle, which is when we are on the first and the last episode, we just do a little bit of a jitter. So it just moves those points in and out just a little bit, just to help with that separation. So this piece of code here is purely just a little adjustment of the first and last episode positioning, so the coordinates that are getting used, just to make it look a little bit nicer and get that nicer separation between those seasons. Coming down, we then have the main bit of graphing. So we've got our ggplot, we've specified our data, we've got a GM curve. The with shadow is adding those neat little shadows on the bottom of the lines, and so that was one of those extra packages that we added. Lets us add that. We've got our line, and so remember main color, that was that red. I made mine a little bit thinner, but again, this is something we can play with the aesthetic. So these are just our horizontal lines. And then we've got our points, and the points are also using this wrapper function without a glow, and so that's giving us that nice little glow effect on all of our points. We've used rich text for our labels, and then here's where we've called the annotation, and so that is just sticking that little label on the outlier point. So we could have had axes labels instead, but it's just really making it really clear. Season 2, episode 7, The Lost Sister, that was the one that was really sitting outside of the others. We then add in the title using shadow text in here, and so shadow text again, just giving that neat shadowy effect. And then coming down, our last little chunk here is just all of the themes bits and pieces. So we can see that we are taking out the x-axis, we're coloring in the grays, specifying the ticks, specifying the grid, making sure that we've got the font that we wanted. And all of this is often the hardest thing. If there's a particular aesthetic that you're trying to get to, matching up the font if you're not quite sure, if there's not already somewhere telling you what the font is, getting those colors right, that can be the thing that takes a bit of time. I found that ChatGPT, that when we do have a whole lot of lines of code like what we have here, it can be pretty good for just giving some explanations. So if there was particular bits that we weren't quite sure about in here, putting it into ChatGPT and just saying, can you please explain this code to me? And it generally, with ChatGPT 4.0, does a pretty good job of being able to explain it. So let's run this code, and it's going to take a second to run, and we can see when it puts the plot down into our little plot window down here in the corner, because we have specified specific sizes for stuff, it has just squished them in. When we hit zoom though, we can stretch it out, get it looking the way that we like, and then we can export it as a JPEG or a PNG, whatever kind of image file we would like. I will link up to the original GitHub, but I will also on my website provide all of my version of the code where I've done these little extra edits and also simplified the way of getting the IMDb data into R. Although a data visualization purist might argue that the little curves going up to the points aren't really technically the best way of demonstrating this, I think with this particular graph and subject matter, it's a little bit more of aesthetics than the best possible data visualization, and I hope that this has given you a bit of insight into producing something a wee bit different in terms of graphs that you can get out of R. Thanks for watching. I'll be back really soon with more videos on R, AI, research, and random stuff.